Hello, and welcome to HR Bytes, a podcast and video series to bring you stories of HR professionals who bring a think globally and act locally digital HR agenda to their work. Everyday people who are driving digital transformations in their organizations, data driven and future fit digital HR leaders. Our guest today is Renuka Iyer. Welcome to the show, Renuka. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Renuka, congratulations on your new role at the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. I believe it's called Pharma. Can you tell us a little bit about your new role and how you're liking it so far? I believe you're in the honeymoon phase of any role in a company.
You're absolutely right. Yes, I just started with Pharma about 3 weeks ago. Actually, this is my fourth week, and that would be the first month of the first 100 days, as you generally would think about it. It's a great organization. There's so much to be said about the pharmaceutical industry, and oftentimes what we see from the outside is not everything that meets the eye on the inside. Health concerns have been of prime topic of importance for the HR function itself since the pandemic. And so when the opportunity at Pharma came to my doorstep, I thought this was a way to really understand what is going on. How do we think about innovation in medicine, and how do we ensure that we create an environment in which access to health and is available to all. So bringing the DEI lens to health was also another reason for me to step into this industry and to join Pharma. And yes, so far I've been loving every moment. I'm like a kid in a candy shop. Everything you see is really cool and innovative, and it's the first time I'm learning about pharmacy benefit managers, for example, to whom more than 50% of the cost we pay for drugs in the United States, that's where it goes. So it's not really going to the manufacturers itself. So learning about these things are very, very interesting, and I look forward to continued learning and impacting the organization.
Wonderful. Well, you've hit upon the very topic that all of our HR colleagues are grappling with today, and that of onboarding and retaining employees in this era of workplace talent ghosting us at every given moment. And so from your own experience, I'm sure there's so many lessons that you can take away for your organization, and as well as for the larger audience that is listening in today. As you know, HR leaders have been, at the front and center of all of this for the past couple of years. And like you mentioned, wellness and health is so one of the biggest topics of discussion at any HR leaders' tables today. How do you think, in your opinion, technology challenges for HR leaders are shaping up in 2023 and beyond when it comes to, enforcing as well as fostering a digital mindset? Because I use the word enforcing because it is highly imperative, in my opinion, that we do leverage technology to augment our human resources work in any organization today. And so I just want to, start off with that question, and then, of course, get your insights on how you're doing it within your organization and how you plan to at this new organization.
Sure. So I think the first challenge is that there are multiple generations in the workforce, right? And so the more newer generations, the Gen Zs, the millennials, are more used to using technology simply because that's how they grew up, right? They grew up with technology by the side, versus the earlier generations, not so much. Back in the day, I still remember doing interoffice memorandums of, interoffice memos, either in typed up or printed out on a dot matrix printer. And these days, nobody even knows what dot matrix printer is.
I can hear the sound of that printer as you speak.
Exactly, isn't it?
It had a distinct sound.
Yes. And you would run it over, you'd print it out, you'd put your signature on it, and then you would run it over to another department so they can consume the information. So I think that has changed, and you're seeing the younger generation really adapt to digital. I think there is a push for the older generations to also adapt. And I think what is really cool about about the digital space in HR is that there are some really new technologies, apps for doing things. For example, if you want to take a look at your pay stub, gone are the days where you have to write to your HR department and request a pay stub, and then it either comes, by a printed copy in the mail. You could just look at your phone and look at the app and get your pay stub, for example. So there's been so much innovation in the digital space that we could certainly leverage. Now, you asked me about challenges, and I'd say there are three challenges. One, our systems are disjoint, right? So there are a lot of systems, and each organization, each software provider is specializing in certain areas. However, what's really not there, or something that I find really hard to navigate, is the disjointed nature of these systems. So if there was a way to kind of bring it all together, then that would be great. The second challenge that I could think about is making these systems people-centered. I mean, you must have heard of the terms, human-centered design. So how do we make sure that we incorporate some of the human-centered design in the making of the systems or the software product itself? So you're keeping in mind the needs of the employees, the managers, the leaders, and then designing the system, designing the software through which the information can flow in a manner that it's readily available. There's also, each organization has their own language and what they call certain things, right? So for example, in some organizations, you would say base salary. In other organizations, you would use the word compensation. In another organization, you could use the word annual salary, right? So all of these things may mean the same thing, but each organization has its own language. And I think there is a challenge that the software systems don't allow us to speak that language. And so, oftentimes you'd have to say, yeah, when you want to look at your annual salary, look at the base salary field. I mean, why couldn't you just convert it to annual salary if that's what the people are used to, right? So thinking like that and thinking human-centered design, incorporating some of that, I think would be the second challenge. And then the third and the final, and I'm going to shut up in just a bit, is implementation. I've worked in organizations. I've been in the HR function for over 30 years now, and I think the biggest challenge that most HR teams are faced with is that we're not IT nerds. We are human resources professionals, right? So there is a certain necessity for us to learn the IT space, but even more to be able to implement everything we pay for. And so oftentimes when the implementation is not done correctly, I think, things fail. We've used systems, not really used all the features in the systems. That's another piece that I think is such a shame, that there's so much money is invested in technology, but then when it's not used, you don't really gain the benefits of it.
Wonderful. And those three challenges, I'm sure everyone is facing them today. And I'm sure they resonate with a lot of our audience today as well. And that's a great segue into the second piece I wanted to talk to you about today, where, we've had so much technology thrown at us in the HR function for the past couple of years, especially since 2020. And how do you think HR teams should be handling this mindset of buying every shiny new object in the HR tech space? As you mentioned, we have so much disjointed technology because of that. How do you think we can overcome this mindset of buying every shiny new object? And what is one takeaway from your experience that you'd like to share when it comes to that?
I think that's a great question. It's about the shiny objects are needed when they are needed, when the organization is ready for it. Oftentimes, when organizations are not ready, there is no demand for the next new thing in the HR world. I think the first thing that we need to do, and if the HR team believes it is the right thing to do, then I think what needs to happen first is to create that demand internally, right? So if you invest in these shiny new apps and new different types of things that are out there in the market without really having a demand, it may be a sunk cost. Like, you may be investing in it, but you're not really going to get anything out of it. And so, staff complaints will continue to be there. You're not going to be able to, get any, any substantive data or information or reports from the investments you make. And you want to be able to, do that. I mean, when you're investing in technology, you want to be able to create trends for leaders so they can think about what they should be doing in their business next. I mean, investing in these shiny technology, HR and specifically talent technology parts have to serve a bigger purpose, which is the purpose of the organization. And when that doesn't really happen, I don't think it might be the best investment to make. You could take those dollars and invest in elsewhere, maybe employee benefits or something like that. So really thinking about who's HR doing the work for, and not really doing HR work for HR's sake, but doing HR work to serve the needs of the organization and to serve the people. I think with keeping that front and center is very, very important.
So, keeping that perspective in mind, what do you think, your role and your networks and your connections within the organization, your social capital, so to speak, has played in generating, incubating, and scaling innovation, not just in your HR function, but throughout your organization?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think HR, we have to, or at least this is what I've done, do a lot of listening, right? Listening and connecting the dots and being curious about connecting the dots in a way that that you don't really hesitate to do, right? Like take the risk, asking those questions and asking one department questions about the work that you're hearing in the other department. Oftentimes, when people are working within the organization, they're sort of working on in their own silos, simply because every Monday morning there's a huge task list that you just keep doing week after week after week, and it's really hard for our teams to look up and be able to take the top of the T perspective. And HR has that, in my capacity, as I work alongside the executive team or the management committees, or just speaking with different departments, learning and appreciating the amount of work the depth of work that's there, but at the same time as being curious about how all of these things connect for the larger good of the organization, I think is important. So to me, those would be the threes: the being curious, not afraid to ask, connect, not afraid to connect. So being curious, connections, and also lifting up and communicating in a manner that it's So I read somewhere, you want to communicate like you're communicating like you're on a trampoline. So you ask a question, get the response, ask the question, get the response. So being in that continuous communication, I think, would also be a catalyst for this.
Wonderful analogy. I love trampolines. So, what could be some barriers you think for a successful HR tech implementation? Again, we know there's a lot of disjointed stuff in our function at the present time, and at the same time, we're trying to get in new tech to solve a lot of the immediate needs of our workforce. How do you think HR executives should and can test if a technology is truly going to serve the needs that it says it's going to serve, is truly based on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the newfangled tech that is out there? What is your experience when it comes to some of the barriers for a successful tech implementation?
I could think of it as in two buckets. One, of course, is internal, right? And I talked a little bit about it. If the organization is not ready for it, then it's quite a shame investing the money if the organization is not ready. And I think a lot of work needs to be done internally, and there has to be executive buy-in, right, from the top. You want to know why you're doing what you're doing. So if HR is going, if we are by ourselves, if we are trying to do the implementation, that often fails. So making sure that there is good partnership, for example, with with the IT team, or making sure there's good partnership with the executive team, making sure that they understand what are the benefits, what kind of reports you will get from the new implementation. I think those are all things that are very, very important. So the internal piece, I cannot tell you, that is the most important piece. the external, of course, making sure that you have done the amount of due diligence that's necessary in the selection process. So, for example, being extremely clear about what is it that you're looking for. And oftentimes, you just, again, I think you talked about the shiny object. Sometimes people just think, hey, this is the talk of the town and let's go invest in it, without really asking themselves, without really knowing what the system can do. So being very clear about what the system can do, and that is what you want, is one. Second, I think making sure that there is a good reference. Now, somebody who has tested the system can talk to it, and making sure that you spend the time to check your references, to think about, to hear stories about implementation in other organizations can also be helpful. And then post implementation, making sure that there is a team externally that you could go to when you have trouble. A lot of software organizations are now having these support hubs. So making sure that you are part of the support hub and asking questions and finding tricks. And oftentimes when you implement systems, you want to know what are the tricks to get to the results that you want. So making sure that's there. And then finally, making sure that the system also provides a good customer support after the sale is done. So those would be the few that come to mind.
Wonderful. And when we think about the tech that's out there, we now have a very disparate workforce as well. There is a lot of remote work that's happening, hybrid work that's happening, and in-office work that's happening all at the same time, asynchronously, but happening. How do you think we in human resources can leverage data and metrics in this new workplace that we've all been kind of thrown into, and use data and metrics to handle this increase in remote and hybrid work?
Yeah, so I think data by itself, a piece of data is just that, right? It's a piece of data. But to be able to take that information from data to insights is something that I think as HR people should learn to do it. And the way to do that is to make sure that you're monitoring the data over time. So thinking about what's happening to the data: is it trending up, trending down? Is it staying? So are there any relationships you can find? Is there a cause and effect, for example, or are there, in terms of engagement, staff engagement, are you able to pull out numbers? Do they then connect to retention or connect to turnover? Those are the types of things that you want to think about. And then once you've analyzed the data, making sure that you convert it to insights and make sure that you take those insights and be curious about them and talk to people about them, right? This is what our data is telling us. Is this what you're finding in your experience? Because managers will experience their staff a certain way, and they can talk about their experience. So I think it's not just about looking at the data, it's about converting the data into insights and then curiously probing if those insights are relevant in the experiences of people that work with us. And that is when I think you create that common language to say, hey, if this is the experience and if this is not the experience we need, then what other systems or what other processes can we put in place to alter the experience? So at the end of the day, it's about the people experience, isn't it? So whether you're working virtually or not, making sure that you collect those insights and be curious about them is can help you bring everybody together and have them sing out of the same song sheet, for lack of another analogy.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. So, on that note, what's one piece of advice you have for HR professionals who are looking to adopt or learn new technology, especially when it comes to adopting new technology like, Web3 or artificial intelligence, which are really newfangled tech terms for a lot of our HR colleagues?
Yeah, I just say don't be afraid, right? It's sometimes you think about, for example, where I come from, math is something that's quite a scare. People are not very comfortable that they do great in math, right? And so maths and science for that matter. However, not being afraid and simply engaging in it, I'd recommend going to seminars, reading about these newer technologies, and thinking about it just like a cell phone, right? Who
Mm.
knew, back in the day when I was growing up, there were no cell phones. We would have those physical phones, that you have to dial in and run and go to a certain spot in the home to be able to even pick up the phone and talk. Those days are gone, and we've adapted to newer technologies. So, not being afraid of these newer technologies and not being afraid of machine learning, being curious about how does this machine learn, what is really happening, and how do these algorithms work, and learning about the workflow will help alleviate some of that fear and also put you in the driver's seat to have those conversations with your leaders. So I'd say, go to all the conferences, read up about it, and watch the space. There are a lot of like, for example, SHRM is one area that you could partner with, and you can look at the materials that are coming out from SHRM, or other such organizations. Hacking HR is another. There's a whole slew of conversations around technology in that spot. So I'd say, go to those places, learn up about machine learning, artificial intelligence. This is the order of the day, and so you don't want to miss out on the boat. So just immerse yourself in it, and then you'll see where you get.
Wonderful. So that brings us to the funner part of today's conversation, which is our question connection round, where I ask you a question and you give me an answer out of your hat, or so to speak, out of your brain.
Right.
So let's get started. Who was one person you've gained in your network in the last year or so within the HR tech space that you think more people should know about?
That's a great question. Of course, I'm speaking with you, so I can say you. I know you were doing
Thank you.
quite a lot of work in your own startup, HR Geckos, and so I've known you. I think people should know you and should learn about the work you're doing. You're challenging some very what may say well established um, people out there whose systems are there to serve. But I think, as a woman and entrepreneur, I really welcome the opportunity to have known you, and I hope that others get to know you and your work as well.
Well, thank you so much. That makes me feel wonderful. Thank you. Happy Monday.
Absolutely.
What's one favorite HR book that you'd recommend, or an HR podcast that you'd recommend to our audience when it comes to learning about all of this new tech out there?
Well, I don't know if I could recommend something about tech itself. I've not read a book about HR tech itself. So if you have any recommendations, I'll take them. But more generally about HR, the book that I quite enjoyed is Nine Lies About Work, by Marcus. How can I forget his name? Marcus Buckingham and
Buckingham.
Ashley. Yes, and Ashley Goodall. Their book, I would certainly encourage people to read it. And there are a bunch of podcasts on the book as well. So certainly that. And then once you've read that book, you get a sense for how to think about data, right? And how do you think about those insights we talked about? And then you'll be able to get some ideas for what questions to ask in the digital space to be able to connect those two dots. So Nine Lies About Work is my new favorite.
Wonderful. I met Marcus at the 2019 HR Tech Conference in Vegas, and he gave us all his autographed books, at no cost to all the attendees. So I have that I think in my shelf in the back here. Um,
Yes.
what's your favorite LinkedIn Learning or e-learning webinar series that you probably have either listened to or watched for the HR tech space or HR in general?
Again, I'll tell you HR in general. Certainly, the series on DEI have been extremely helpful. Each of us come with a certain perspective, and there's just one perspective because it's one life that we live. And making ourselves more open is one way of making ourselves more open is to listen to other perspectives, right? And so the topics around DEI have been extremely helpful to me in expanding my own view of the world and learning about the circle of socialization and things like that. That has been extremely helpful.
Wonderful. And when it comes to giving back to the HR community, you are a big, big giver. I mean, I've tapped into your giving many, many times over the past, I think, 5 years that I've known you now. How do you enjoy giving back to the HR community in general and specifically to the HR tech community and the other communities that you're part of?
Well, well, thank you first of all for saying that. Certainly, engaging in conversations outside of work in the community at large help me do two things. One, those questions that you ask help me think about things differently, right? I mean, not gen. I mean, in your day-to-day work, you don't really think about these things. Only when someone asks you a question like this, it helps. So participating in these types of conversations and engaging in them is not just a way of giving back, but also a way of reflection for myself. So that's been helpful. But most importantly, what I really enjoy is mentoring younger people or mentoring others who are new to the profession or who are veterans in the profession, but are faced with a very, a tricky challenge or something like that. So those conversations sometimes are extremely specific, and then you're trying to pick that puzzle apart and trying to put it back. And so that's another way that I've been trying to give back. I keep my doors open. I tell people if they need to contact me over the weekend, I'm available for a chat. If there are tricky situations that they're working on and they just need a sounding board or some different ideas, I think all of us come at it differently and we all have different experiences. So that would be the other way that I've tried to stay engaged externally.
And when you say you're available on the weekend, I know you are because I have tapped into that time over the weekend with you many times as well. So audience, do take her up on that. She really means that. So if our
Absolutely.
audience would like to connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that? Is LinkedIn something that you use to connect with folks that you welcome into your network, or is there another way to connect with you?
Yes, LinkedIn certainly is the easiest way for me to connect with people. I log into LinkedIn very often, and I pick up the LinkedIn messages, and that's one way to connect. And then, of course, I will also make sure that my contact information is left with you. So if anybody contacts you, please pass it on, and happy to connect with them in that manner as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Renuka. It's always a pleasure to learn from you and, glean all these insights that you are always so willing to share. And audience, like Renuka said, please do tap into her brain. It's a really, really massive enterprise there, and she's got really great insights to share with you. And, at any given time, if there's anything you want to talk about in the HR space or HR tech space, we're always here at HR Bytes to share the knowledge that we are, learning through the communities that we are a part of. And we always wish you all the very best in all your HR tech adventures. And if you'd like to share one of your adventures, please feel free to connect with us here. I'm happy to have you as a guest on our show as well. So thank you again, Renuka. Very nice to see you today, and take care.
Thank you, Jay. It was wonderful talking to you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.